My name is Ben Carter. I wasn't always a single dad. Once, not so long ago, I was a husband, a warehouse foreman, a guy who could afford Friday night pizza for his family and a trip to the beach every summer. But now I'm just trying to keep the lights on. My daughter Zoe just turned 7. She's the reason I breathe. The reason I get out of bed every morning, lace up my boots, and do whatever it takes to keep us going. I work nights at the gas station on Maple and 14th, then mornings hauling lumber at a construction site that barely pays enough to cover rent. I sleep in my car sometimes during the 2-hour gap between shifts. On the worst days, I pretend we're playing a game when dinner is just canned beans again. I try not to let her see the cracks in my armor. I patch them with silly bedtime stories and warm hugs. But some days the weight feels unbearable. Still, we keep going. It was a cold Tuesday afternoon in early February. Zoe had a half day at school, and I was rushing to pick her up. I just finished my shift at the lumber yard and hadn't eaten since midnight. I was tired, cold, hungry, and late. That's when I saw her. An elderly woman standing on the side of the road near Harrison Park. Her arms were wrapped around a paper bag filled with groceries that looked like they weighed more than she did. One of her shoes was untied. She looked lost. I slowed down. Something in her face, maybe the way she stared blankly at the snow or the way her lips moved like she was trying to remember where she was going, made me stop. "Mom," I said, rolling down the window. "You all right?" She looked at me, confused, then smiled faintly. I think I took the wrong bus. I was going home, but I can't remember which street. It's all a bit foggy today." Zoe was waiting. I was already late, but something about the way her hands trembled around that paper bag tugged at something deep in me. "Hop in," I said, unlocking the door. "Let's figure this out together." She hesitated for a second, then climbed in slowly. Her coat smelled faintly of lavender and old paperbacks. "My name's Evelyn," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Evelyn Hart." "I'm Ben," I replied. "And this is Zoe's booster seat." "Sorry for the clutter." She smiled. "You have a child?" I nodded. 7 years old, and probably wondering where the heck I am. She chuckled softly. "She's lucky to have you." I started driving, hoping maybe the scenery would jog her memory. I asked a few questions, where she lived, who she lived with, but she kept drawing blanks. Then, after a few minutes, she pointed at a small red brick house with peeling shutters and said, "That one. I think that's it." We pulled into the driveway. No cars. The porch light was flickering. I walked her up to the door just to be safe. She fumbled with her keys for a moment, then stopped. I don't think these are my keys." My heart dropped. I didn't know what to do. Leaving her there didn't feel right. But I had Zoe and dinner and bills and exhaustion clawing at my back like a bear. I called 311 and reported a possible case of an elderly person with memory loss. They said someone would be dispatched, but it might take time. "Do you want to come with me?" I asked. "Just until we can figure this out." She looked embarrassed. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not." Back at my apartment, Zoe greeted her like a long-lost aunt. Kids have that gift. No judgment, just curiosity and kindness. Evelyn told her stories about a puppy she had once named Moonbeam and how she used to teach music to kids Zoe's age. That night, we made pancakes for dinner. Evelyn couldn't remember her full address, but she remembered how to flip a pancake with style. The officers came by around 9:00 p.m. I half expected them to take her away to some cold facility, but they were gentle, kind. They ran a few checks and eventually got in touch with someone. Her niece, Clara, who lived across town. "She's been missing since this morning," Clara said when she arrived, her eyes red from crying. "She has early-stage dementia. Sometimes she just wanders." Before they left, Evelyn turned to Zoe and me. Her eyes looked clearer now, more focused. "Thank you," she said, taking my hand. "Most people wouldn't have stopped." I smiled. "We're not most people." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled business card. "If you ever need anything, call this number. Tell them Evelyn Hart sent you." I didn't think much of it then. Just a kind gesture, a thank you, but that card, it would change everything. Life didn't pause just because something unusual happened. The next morning, I was back at the construction site, half awake, trying to pretend my hands weren't numb from February frost. But I couldn't stop thinking about Evelyn. Her voice, her stories, that warm presence she brought into our cramped apartment for just one evening. It lingered. And then there was the card. I pulled it from my wallet during my lunch break, curious now that the adrenaline had worn off. It was elegant, thick cream paper, embossed gold lettering. The Hart Foundation. Executive office. There was a number. No website. No email. Just a name I hadn't even realized until that moment. Evelyn Hart. As in the Hart Foundation, the organization known across the state for running hospitals, funding youth education, and building community centers. I blinked. No way. Not her. I waited 3 days. Maybe out of hesitation. Maybe because I didn't want to hope. Then Zoe got a cold. Nothing serious, just a stubborn cough. But when I saw the pharmacy bill for the antibiotics, something inside me cracked. I pulled out the card, sat at the kitchen table, and dialed the number. A calm, professional voice answered. Hart Foundation, Executive Reception. How may I help you? I cleared my throat. My name's Ben Carter. I was asked to call. Evelyn Hart gave me this number. There was a pause. Then, please hold. Classical music played for a few seconds before the line picked up again. This time, with a deeper voice. A man's voice. Mr. Carter, he said. I'm David Kingsley, special advisor to Mrs. Hart. She asked us to expect your call. Would you be available to meet with us tomorrow morning? I hesitated.
Not sure, I guess.
Where? He gave me the address. Downtown skyscraper territory. I had to borrow a dress shirt from my neighbor just to look halfway presentable. The cuffs were too long, and the collar scratched my neck, but it was better than my dusty work hoodie. I took the train downtown, palms sweating the whole way. Zoe stayed with her friend's mom, who owed me a favor. The building was glass and chrome. 3 floors of polished wealth. When I stepped into the elevator, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. I looked like a man who didn't belong here. But then I remembered Evelyn's smile, her trust, her words, if you ever need anything. The receptionist was waiting for me on the 33rd floor. She smiled. Mr. Carter, welcome. Mrs. Hart is expecting you. Mrs. Hart. She was seated in a wheelchair near the floor, tip-ceiling windows, sunlight painting her silver hair gold. She looked different, more alert, sharper, but the warmth was still there. I was wondering if you'd call, she said softly. I nodded, unsure what to say. You helped me, she continued, at a time I didn't know I needed help. And that kind of thing, it doesn't go unnoticed. Evelyn didn't waste time. She gestured toward a folder on the coffee table. Inside were documents, letters, and what looked like applications. You once said you work nights at a gas station and haul lumber during the day. Is that right? Yes, ma'am. You also said your daughter loves bedtime stories about brave animals and pancakes with too much syrup. I smiled faintly. That's her. I've been thinking, she said, her fingers tracing the edge of her teacup, about what kind of people this world needs more of. I didn't understand what she was getting at. She handed me the folder. This is a proposal. It's not charity, it's an opportunity. Inside were papers offering me a full scholarship. Yes, me. To finish my business degree online, fully funded. A monthly stipend to allow me to cut back hours. And after 6 months, a probationary position at one of the Hart Foundation's youth programs, as a community mentor. My head spun. I don't get it, I finally said. Why me? She leaned in. Because you stopped when no one else did. I didn't say yes right away. That night, I walked the long blocks home instead of taking the train. My thoughts were loud. I'd spent the past 5 years clawing through every day, thinking help wasn't coming. I'd convinced myself I didn't need it. Now that it was here, I wasn't sure how to take it. What if I failed? What if I wasn't good enough? Zoe was asleep when I got in, her tiny hands curled under her cheek. I kissed her forehead, sat beside her bed, and held that folder like it was radioactive. The old part of me wanted to throw it away. Be stubborn. Say no thanks. I'm fine. But I wasn't fine, and more importantly, she deserved better. So I made a decision. 2 weeks later, I quit my night job. It felt terrifying, like stepping off a ledge. But with the stipend, I could manage. I'd work part-time at the site and spend the rest of my day taking classes, cooking proper meals, and being the kind of dad Zoe needed me to be. And every Sunday, Zoe and I visited Evelyn. We brought her flowers. She brought us stories. She'd once been a music teacher, a writer, a world traveler, and now, a woman trying to make sure her final years weren't spent forgetting, but giving back. One Sunday, she asked if I'd speak at a youth event. Me, Ben Carter, the guy who used to sleep in his car. I wouldn't know what to say. I told her, "Say what's true," she replied. Like what? Like how kindness isn't weakness. How hard times don't mean you're broken. And how sometimes, helping a stranger can unlock something that changes your life. T2. The auditorium was full of restless teens and half-distracted staff members. I was standing backstage, gripping my note cards like they were lifelines. I wasn't a speaker. I wasn't educated or polished or anything that usually stood on that stage. But I had one thing: truth. And when I walked up, stared into those young faces, some hardened, some scared, I just told them about Zoe, about working nights, about eating dollar ramen, about watching a sick little girl sleep while praying the gas wouldn't get shut off, and about Evelyn, about how one act of kindness, one human moment, flipped everything upside down. By the time I finished, there was silence, and then applause, real, earnest, not polite. I stepped off stage and Evelyn was waiting with her hands folded, smiling like she already knew. "You just planted something," she whispered. 2 weeks turned into months. I passed my first 2 classes with straight A's, business ethics and non-profit structures. I was shocked at how much I loved learning again. Zoe was blooming too. She started drawing more, reading chapter books. She even made a little pancake award for me out of construction paper. Best dad in the multiverse. And every Sunday we went to Evelyn's. Her memory had good days and bad. Some days, she'd tell the same story twice in one sitting. Other days, she'd recite entire poems from memory. She became part of our rhythm. One afternoon, she gave Zoe an old wooden box. It was carved with tiny stars and music notes. "I used to keep my compositions in here," she said, "but now it belongs to you." Inside were pages, handwritten, fading sheet music. "Do you play piano?" Zoe asked. Evelyn smiled. "I used to." Zoe's eyes lit up. "I want to learn." I couldn't afford lessons. Not really. But Evelyn had a friend, a retired pianist named Ruth, who agreed to teach Zoe for free, just once a week. Zoe took to it like she'd been waiting her whole life. She sat at that keyboard like it was a spaceship, fingers stumbling and then soaring. By the third lesson, she could play the first half of Claire de Lune without a single wrong note. Evelyn cried the first time she heard it. "She has the touch," she whispered. Something in her voice sounded different. Final. That night, after Zoe went to bed, I asked, "Are you okay?" She nodded. But then she looked at me, quiet and steady. "There's something I need to tell you, Ben." I sat across from her at the kitchen table in her apartment. Warm, quiet, lit only by the glow of a single lamp. She reached for a folder in her drawer. Inside were letters, documents, and something that looked like a will. "This," she said, placing it in front of me, "is why I gave you that card." I blinked, confused. "You think I chose you out of kindness," she said. "But that's only half true." She took a breath. "6 months before we met, I saw you." I froze. "What do you mean?" "I was at Harrison Park with my niece, feeding the ducks. You were sitting on a bench. Zoe was beside you, bundled in that red coat with the duck hood. You had your head in your hands. You didn't know anyone was watching." I remembered that day. It was the day the power got shut off. "I saw how you looked at her," Evelyn said, her voice soft. "Like the world was falling apart. But you were trying to hold it together just for her." She leaned in, and I remembered someone. Ooh, my father. Who Evelyn's father had been a railroad worker during the Depression. Dirt poor, widowed, raising Evelyn and her sister alone. "He never made much," she said, eyes glossy. "But he gave me everything, even when he had nothing." When Evelyn became successful, she created the Heart Foundation in his name. But she always looked for people like him. People no one notices, but who carry the world on their back anyway. You reminded me of him, she said, so I had one of our researchers quietly find out who you were. My throat tightened. All I needed was a moment to meet you, to see if I was right. She reached for my hand, and I was. Over the next hour, Evelyn explained the full truth. The folder she gave me was an amended will. In it, she had listed Zoe and me as primary beneficiaries to a portion of her estate, specifically earmarked for educational purposes, housing security, and community leadership development. I don't have much time, she said, and I don't want it wasted on lawyers or people who only see me as a name on a building. I was speechless. Why? Was all I could whisper. She smiled. Because the world changes one person at a time, and sometimes those people don't need charity. They need someone to bet on them. 2 months later, Evelyn's health worsened. The memory slips became more frequent. Some days, she didn't recognize me at all. Other days, she thought Zoe was her little sister Lucy. But still, every Sunday we came, and Zoe played. And sometimes, just sometimes, Evelyn would sit beside her, and together they'd fill the room with music so beautiful it made the curtains flutter like they were listening. One afternoon, Evelyn handed me a key. To what? I asked. She didn't answer right away. Then finally, to something I never showed anyone. You'll know when it's time. It was a Sunday, overcast, windy. Zoe had just learned a new melody and was excited to show Evelyn. She practiced all morning, tapping her fingers on the kitchen counter, humming between bites of toast. But when we arrived, the nurse was waiting at the front desk. She's resting today, she said gently. It's been a quiet day. She's not responding much. Zoe clutched the music sheets she had drawn with stars and hearts. Can I still play for her? She whispered. The nurse looked at me. I nodded. Inside the room, Evelyn was lying peacefully, her eyes closed. The piano sat untouched in the corner. Zoe sat down quietly, adjusted the bench, and began to play, soft, slow, careful. Every note was a whisper of love. Halfway through the piece, Evelyn stirred. Her eyes fluttered open just for a moment, and then, barely audible, she said, "You found it." We didn't know what she meant. Not yet. 3 days later, Evelyn passed, quietly, peacefully. The nurse said she went in her sleep, her hand resting on a folded scarf she used to wear when she taught music. I didn't cry right away. Zoe did. She wrapped her arms around me and sobbed into my chest like she was losing a grandmother. Maybe she was. After the service, a simple affair with soft music and wildflowers, I remembered the key. That evening, I returned to Evelyn's apartment. Clara met me there. She wanted you to have anything personal in the music room, Clara said. Said you'd understand what to keep. I walked in and stood still. The room was quiet. Dust floated in the light. Framed photos on the wall, sheet music stacked neatly, and then in the corner closet, a locked drawer. The key fit perfectly. Inside was a single item, a dusty leather journal with gold leaf initials LH.